I'm not working in this sun. Rhythm to the rhythm of a reggae drum. Thirsty blood on his salty tears don't rain. And I'll sing the old songs. We don't think white men feel reggae. 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 We'll offer you a position. So I got offered this job over there in a place called Swakopmund, which was a German, had a German name because it was a German colony for a while. So I got on the plane and I flew over there, and it was just in these little twin prop planes. There was about 3 or 4 of us on the plane. I remember looking down and it looked like the surface of the moon. There was a car parked on this dusty runway. And it was a woman from the Rossing HR department to pick up new employees. So 3 or 4 of us got off this little plane, Piper, Cherokee Piper or something, put our stuff in the back of the car, and she drove us into town. Now we were given accommodation in this accommodation block. They were like little units, and it had you know, single bedroom and a little lounge area, little kitchen. You didn't really need a kitchen because the food was supplied. So I just put my bags in and I was being shown around. I went into the big sort of canteen area, and there were bain-maries full of food and lots of tables. There was about a couple of 100 people living in this complex, all wearing khaki mining outfits, and me. And you know, it takes me a while to get to know anyone. I'm pretty shy, but you know, I got to meet a couple of people in the first few weeks. There were lots of foreigners like me, young single people. So I got friendly with a guy from Kenya and a guy from Canada and a guy from the UK, and started hanging out with them. But they were like mining engineering students. They were very interested in gemstones and minerals and that sort of thing. So the next morning, at about 5:30 a.m, you know, you're woken up, and this is that was the first shock to my system. We're woken up, you go into the food section. They could give you a bag, you know, a lunch to take with you, but there was all the breakfast stuff there, you know, sausage, eggs, bacon, all sort of stuff, juice, cereal. And then you went out to the buses, and the buses were sitting idling, a long line of these blue buses with Rossing written on them. You know, it was still dark, and people were still half asleep, so you get on these buses, and off we'd go. And it was about an hour from Swakopmund, which was on the coast. It was a very cold... yeah, we were on the coast. Swakopmund was on the coast. Just going to move, can get a bit more comfortable. My bum's getting a bit numb there. I don't know whether it was the Atlantic Ocean on the west coast of Africa. I don't know, but it was the ocean was icy cold, and the fog would roll in off the ocean into where it met the desert. The mine was out in the desert, so we get on these buses. It was about an hour and 10 minutes every morning and every day coming back on these buses, and it would drop us off at the mine. And that was my first shock, was the fact that you had to actually do work. you know, that Ajax had been a big joke to me, and got away with doing as little work as possible, whereas, you know, they wanted you to actually do work. And there was a fella there that was they call them coloureds, so he was a mixed blood African and European, and he was very keen to prove himself to his brother was the manager of the section. He was very keen to prove himself, so he kind of was doing all the work. You know, as soon as a tape was needed, he was onto it, and consequently I sort of sat back and I didn't do much. I used to change the paper in the printer and separate the print, and I let him do all the work. So after a while, I was called into the big manager's office. I thought I was going to be kind of congratulated and, you know, thanked for my service or whatever. But he said they were very disappointed with me, that I didn't seem to know anything. I'd been there for a few months and I wasn't doing anything. So I explained it was this guy Joe was doing all the work, and I was just sitting back and helping him out basically, but he was running the show. So the boss said, well, we'll have a word with Joe, and we want you to do all the, you know, we want you to learn the system. Now in that time, I was starting to go out weekends with these young guys that I mentioned before. We were going into the desert. One of them had bought a Land Rover, an old Land Rover. We were going out into the desert and finding Bushman paintings in caves, and we were finding gemstones, and, you know, Namibia, or Southwest Africa as it was mostly desert with big sand dunes. Ended up buying this motorbike. I didn't have a motorbike license. I'd kind of mucked around on motorbikes a few times. I wouldn't say that I knew how to ride very well, but I ended up buying this 750 Honda XL. Of course, I came off it, you know, with the Canadian handy on the back seat. When I hadn't had it very long, wasn't going very fast, so no real damage done, but I did smash up this beautiful watch that I bought duty free in Melbourne before I left. But anyway, that talking to by the manager spooked me a bit, and to be honest, it was terrible. You know, like, there was no way you could get home without the buses, so you were looking at, you know, 11-hour days when you weighed up the you know, the travel in the buses and being on site with this uranium mine. You didn't really see much of the mine, but sometimes you'd feel blasting. The computer room would shake and that. So I realised they were onto me, that I actually wasn't a very good computer operator, and so I started to make plans to get out of there. And I think I was there for about 6 months. We used to pay, you got paid monthly. There was a bar back at the accommodation block, and I quite often would have to pay, you know, up to a third of my monthly wage to the bar to settle my bill from sitting in there drinking. You know, I was an alcoholic, starting to find their straps. And, you know, that girl back in Melbourne that I'd kind of got bored with and you know, didn't want her anymore, wanted more adventure. Well, now I couldn't stop missing her. And, you know, with no friends and nothing to do on weekends, sitting around writing all these heartfelt letters, I'm sorry, and I want you back, and I love you, and all sort of nonsense. Listening to the sad songs on the radio. They used to have these troop requests, so lonely girlfriends would dedicate songs to their South African boyfriends in the army. I'd sit and listen to that. Total Eclipse of the Heart, I remember, was a big one. So I was writing all these letters back to this girl, and I was really homesick, and so anyway I decided to give notice. As I said, I was there about 6 months. They were really pissed off with me, but I had the motorbike, so I decided to go up and see Dad. I'm really glad I did. It was a fantastic trip. Well, it could have been. I'd have been better organised, knew what I was doing. So I put my backpack on the motorbike. I got a big travel tank, and I set off from Swakopmund up through Southwest Africa. Now, at that time, there was a war going on with what they called SWAPO, which was the Southwest African People's Organisation. They were infiltrating from Angola with Cuban support, fighting the South Africans. So that South Africa was had a hold on Southwest Africa as a protectorate. So anyway, yeah, I rode up to a thing called the Caprivi Strip, which was this thick dust road which went a couple of 100 kilometres, and the terrorists, as they were called then, they'd be freedom fighters now, used to put mines in the road, blow up army trucks. So there was like convoys used to travel, but I didn't worry too much about that. I just took my chances and I rode this dirt bike, which was ideal for the Caprivi Strip, except I kept getting bloody flats. You know, I hadn't thought ahead about getting some spare tubes for the bike. First time I got a flat, I ended up near a it was like a mission station, I suppose, because I remember I sat there in the dust. It was stinking hot and you know, dry, and this white fella pulled up in a they call them bucky, like a ute. He said, "What's up?" I said, "Look, my motorbike's got a flat tire." He says, "Oh, I've got a mechanic on site at the agricultural school." I think it was a school, actually, agricultural school. So he called out for these Africans, and they jumped off the back of the truck and picked up my motorbike, put it in there, and he says, you know, get him to have a look at it for you. So very kind of him. So we went back to this agricultural college, and you know, I was sitting around sort of the workshop, and it started to get dark, and I thought, well, what do I do now? So there was like a trailer with a tarpaulin over the back of it near the workshop where the African, I don't think he'd started working on it, maybe he was already looking at it, but I figured I'd have to sleep there for the night. So I climbed in under this tarpaulin, eaten alive by mosquitoes, when this African man, he came and he tapped on, he said, "Look, no good, bzz, too many bzz." I go, "You go sleep." So he pointed me up to this farmhouse, and you could see all the white people up there. There were lanterns swinging, and there was a sound of music and talking. He said, "You're the white people, you go sleep, white people." But I was too shy, you know, I didn't want to do that, so I said, no, I don't want to go there. He says, "You come with me." So he took me to this dormitory where there was about 40 or 50 bunks with all these Africans, young men, I guess learning to be agricultural workers or farmers or something. So they let me have a shower, and they let me have a bed for the night. So I bunked down, and next morning the mechanic had fixed the tyre for me. He said the hole was near the valve, so he couldn't do much, but he patched it as best as he could. So I got on the bike, took off again. I think I got about 30 kilometres down this track, went bang, the wheel went again. Oh no. So I waited by the side of the road again, and this time this army truck came along, and these South African army guys got out, asked what's wrong. I explained that I had a flat tyre again on the motorbike. So they picked up the bike. They said they were stopping off at this little school, and they dropped me and the bike off for the night. They were turning around going back then. So they dropped me off at this school. So I pushed the bike down this driveway, and there was a little single school, and these two white South African army guys were there, and their job was to guard the school against the terrorists. So there were sandbags up against the windows to stop, you know, grenades coming through or whatever. And these guys were young. They're about 20. Well, remembering I was 22, so we're about the same age. At night we started smoking weed. We're sitting around the fire, listening to music, talking. They gave me a bed for the night, and they got on their radio and they called up for a truck to pick me and my bike up and take me to this town called Malilu. So the next day, yeah, this big truck arrives, you know, all camouflaged and all that. And when they opened the back tray, were these Africans with their hands tied behind their backs and sacks over their heads. They were terrorist suspects that have been, you know, taken captive by the army. Well, they were left to bounce around in the back of this truck with my motorbike as they got me to Malilu, which was this tiny little town. And when I got there, it was a hell of a long drive. I remember actually the officer in charge of this squadron. He had a little ute as well. So he said, drive with me, the guys in the truck will be behind us, because otherwise we will be swimming in their dust. So we took off in his ute, and he stopped off at a officer's mess on the way, and we sat and drank some beers, and he was telling me about himself, and you know, I was telling him a bit about Australia. But anyway, yeah, they dropped me at Katima Malilu, and I was outside the police station. Now, I think I've mentioned in other videos that I figured that you could just sleep at police stations instead of hotels. Just go and ask at the police station. So I pulled that stunt again, and it was an African policeman was at the desk when I got in there, and I explained that I had come up from Southwest Africa, that my motorbike was needing repair, and I needed somewhere to sleep, any chance I could sleep in a cell. He was a bit reluctant, but eventually he gave way, and so he gave me a cell to sleep in. And I locked up the bike. So that night he came and said to me, oh, you come with me,